video on species counterpoint. This is going to be the first video in a series of 4 or 5 videos on species counterpoint. So here's lesson 1, without further ado. So first things first, I think the best way to think about species counterpoint is to kind of think about, is to start off by thinking about intervals. So here's the opening of Pachelbel's canon. In a kind of stripped down version. I'll just play it through, but what you'll want to try to do is to work out the intervals between each pair of notes. So between this note and this note, 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 and so on and so forth through this extract. I'll play it through at the piano. Here we are. Okay, you might want to pause the video here and have a go at working out these intervals. Oh, but quickly, let me just talk through how you might go about working out an interval in case you're not entirely sure. So you need to identify the bottom note and the top note. So you'll identify this note here, this note here. So in this case, that's a D, that's an F sharp. And then you can count from the letter at the bottom to the letter at the top. So in this case, we would count D, E, F, F sharp, and that's, we could basically count as 1, 2, 3. So D to F sharp is a third. Now that's all we need to know for now. We don't need to know what kind of third it is, though, whether it's a major third or a minor third, or less commonly an augmented third or a diminished third. What we do know, though, is that it is a kind of third, and that's all we need for now. So pause the video here and have a go at working out the intervals in this extract. Okay, super. So hopefully you've gotten these answers here. It basically goes third, fifth, third, fifth, third, fifth, third, third, and then octave or unison. So Pachelbel uses almost exclusively thirds and fifths. There's that unison in the end, but the vast majority is just sort of thirds and fifths throughout. And these intervals are important because they give the music its character. These intervals sound really stable, they sound really nice, they don't clash, they don't need to resolve. And so because these intervals sound stable, it's sort of, the music kind of sounds at ease. It sounds, really nice and consonant, really, yes, just sort of really stable. I'll play that through again, just so we can have that with the intervals in mind. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so we've got this. We've got all of these sort of stable intervals in this extract, and that's to sort of further our thinking. What we'll need to do is kind of think about, what consonant interval is, consonant intervals are. So which intervals sound really stable and really nice, and the opposite of those intervals, dissonance, sort of dissonant intervals. So those intervals which sound unstable or harsh. And so here we can say that thirds, fifths, sixths, octaves and unisons are all stable intervals. So if I play a fifth, that interval is stable. We don't need to go anywhere. We can sit on that interval for absolutely days. Absolutely fine. Similarly, if I play a sixth, again, that's nice, that interval sounds stable, we don't need to go anywhere. A third, again, that interval sounds nice and stable, we don't need to go anywhere from that interval, it's nice. We can sit on that for a while. And here's an octave. Once again, that's nice and stable. So if I now play through our sort of dissonant intervals, here's a second. Okay, so that needs to resolve. That needs to resolve here, or Here's a fourth. Now, actually, we might, this is sort of maybe a borderline case, I suppose, we can hear that as a stable interval, but traditionally the fourth has been treated as a dissonance and would resolve down. It's more commonly than not treated as a kind of dissonance. Maybe, in a sort of a more modern context, within the context of like a sus4 chord. So we've got that chord there, that's a D sus4, and that fourth is going to resolve down to the third. We've got the tritone, and that tritone, again, it's unstable, it needs to resolve. And then we've got a seventh. Again, really quite unstable, would need to resolve. And this difference between consonant and dissonant intervals is really important when we're thinking about counterpoint, when we're thinking about how different lines in music relate to each other. So really, what we can say about this sort of Pachelbel opening is that it's an example of first species counterpoint. And first species counterpoint is it's sort of it's like the kind of the first step on the journey to learning about counterpoint. There are 5 species of counterpoint, and they get progressively more difficult. I'm taking this idea of species counterpoint from Fuchs's Grados ad Parnassum, which is this sort of old counterpoint, I think 17th century counterpoint textbook, which takes you through from kind of first species counterpoint up to 5th species, which is Floyd counterpoint, in 2 parts and 3 parts, and I think more parts even, via a series of sort of Socratic dialogues between a teacher figure and a pupil figure. So first species counterpoint is the first step on that journey, and it's really about learning kind of the basics. I've given us a kind of watered down version of that here. So first species counterpoint is sort of note for note. There's only ever one note in the top part for every note in the bottom part, and those notes happen at the same time. So we can see that here. It's always note for note. It only uses consonant intervals, so only those intervals which are stable. So those are thirds, fifths, sixths, and octaves, or unisons. We can see that Pachelbel does that here. It's only thirds, fifths, and octaves. He doesn't include any sixths, but fine. And a rule that we're going to introduce now is that you cannot have 2 fifths or 2 octaves next to each other. You might hear this referred to as no parallel fifths or parallel octaves. And the idea is that they sound quite bland together. They're quite bland intervals. And if you have a fifth and an octave sound next to each other, it doesn't necessarily always sound like 2 independent parts. That sounds almost like one part, whereas I suppose it doesn't help that I've used lots of parallel motion there. So if you have this, that definitely sounds like 2 independent parts, and that's something that we're aiming for in our contrapuntal writing. We want the lines to be evident. So what we're going to do is we're going to try a first species counterpoint exercise. So there's the top part. The top part is given to you, and the given part is referred to as the cantus firmus. It's the given line. So you're going to try writing a bass line for this top part, making sure that it's note for note, one note in the bottom part for every note in the top part. So in this case, your notes are going to be semibreve. So you'll have a semibreve in each bar. You're only allowed to use consonant intervals. So thirds, fifths, sixths, and octaves. You cannot have parallel fifths or octaves. You cannot have 2 fifths or 2 octaves next to each other. And you must, and this is something, this is a rule to be applied in the context of this exercise, or in the context of a counterpoint exercise. You need to start on the tonic, and you need to end with a perfect cadence. So you might pause the video here, have a go at that counterpoint exercise, and yeah, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so here is an example response. This is an example response to that first species exercise that I've given. So as you can see, my response is note for note. We've just got semibreves in the bottom for every, one semibreve at the bottom for every note at the top. And I've only made use of consonant intervals. So it's an octave, a sixth, a sixth, a sixth, a third, a fifth, a third, sixth, third, sixth, fifth, and octave. I've started on the tonic. We've got a C at the very beginning. And I've ended on a perfect cadence. So we've got a 5. It's the dominant note to the tonic note in the last 2 bars. So that is an example of a kind of a first species counterpoint exercise. That's an example of a bit of first species counterpoint. So I hope that helps. I hope that's helpful. I will include some further counterpoint exercises. I think I've got sort of 3 counterpoint exercises that I'll sort of link along with this video that you could have a go at and maybe write a first species response to. Cheers.